Hi, Bonnie. I'm recording here some audio feedback on your statement of belief that I hope will be useful in these final moments of revising your major essay for the course, Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read back through your essay and highlight some things and suggest some spots where I think you are saying something really useful or interesting, and also highlight some spots where I want to push you a little further, or suggest some ways that you might want to push yourself. And so basically the idea is I'm trying to go through the statement of belief in a way that's going to be useful to you in revising your larger theoretical essay. So my goal here is to really focus on questions of how sort of theoretically rigorous or systematic the whole thing is. So, I think when you say what arguments are, you're offering a broad and I think usefully broad view. Arguments are about shaping us. They shape the way human life is, not just in this crazy modern world, but also in all of the other crazy modern worlds before it, right? They tell us what to do, what to buy, what to do, and how to feel. So this way of thinking about argument is defined by shaping others. Now, as you say, not all arguments are equally effective, but we're all influenced in general by some arguments. And then you articulate an effective argument as one that is, in this very sort of Aristotelian way, able to utilize logos, pathos, and ethos, or ethos. And you do, I think you do a good job here sort of laying out in a quick and dirty sort of way what each of those mean for Aristotle. At the same time, as a reader, one of the things I really find myself wondering is, well, what do they mean to you? How do you cash those out? When you think about when you think about using facts, numbers, physical evidence, etc., what does that look like for you in argument? What makes that logos? And what makes that logos something that fits with using quote-unquote emotion? How do these things fit together? What do we do in argument when we use pathos or when we use emotion? How do we communicate them? How do we shape the discourse itself in ways that quote-unquote use these things? And I'm putting quotes around use because one of the things that's interesting to me to hear is to think about, what does it mean to use facts? What are you doing as an arguer when you do that? Or what does it mean to use sadness? As a person making an argument, does that mean you're drumming up some crocodile tears, you're being fake and manipulative, or something else? So that's the one question about those. And then the other question is, how do you see those three things fitting together? You note that there's a kind of there has to be a perfect match or combination of two or three of those. And so I'd be interested to hear more about, well, what does that look like? Is there some golden ratio of the three, or is that something that varies depending on circumstances? And that sort of starts to get to the question about effectivity. Because I also want to know, for you, is effectivity alone enough? If so, then it's easy enough to say, well, how we combine these three things totally depends on audience. We do whatever's going to be most persuasive to a given audience. That's fair enough. That's certainly a view many people have. But that seems a little bit at odds with this idea of active listening. It seems like you value something more than just effective persuasion. And so I kind of want to know, if there's more at stake than just being effective, what does that say about how ethos, pathos, and logos can or should be tied together in good argument? In other words, another way of saying this is, how do they get tied together so as to foster and practice active listening? I also want to challenge you a little bit on the idea of both parties. Especially in digital contexts, often multiple parties are engaging with one another in argument, and equally often, one or more other parties are not actively engaging in the argument, but might well be the real audience. And that's true certainly in older non-digital contexts. In political debates, in many cases, what's at stake is not really very much active listening between two parties, but much more a performance that's meant not really for those two parties to persuade each other, but for each of them to persuade other people. And so that kind of challenges maybe a little bit the notion of active listening. But also, the thing I'm more interested in challenging is, especially in digital contexts, there are often many parties. There's lots of arguers. And even more, you can think about moments that you've watched 2 or 3 or 5 people arguing, and let's say an argument unfolding on Facebook. Well, everybody in that argument, on some level, knows that other people are watching the argument. So the argument has an audience as well that's not really part of it, but that might well be effectively persuaded, even when the people in the argument themselves are not persuaded by one another. And so I'm curious what that fact does to this way of thinking about good argument. How does that change or impact the value that you put on active listening? What does that tell us about how we should be trying to tie ethos, pathos, and logos together, etc.? And so when you say everyone has different experiences, everyone's experiences goes into an argument, etc., that's fine. Hopefully coming to an agreement. Yes, cool. But also, if there's more at stake than just being persuasive, if being persuasive matters, but it's not the only thing, why do the other things matter? In other words, who cares? Who cares about being more than just persuasive? I mean, obviously I do, but why do you? And if, so that thinking about how does being persuasive sort of fit in with the question of active listening, or our obligations in some way, or desire to come to an agreement? How are these all mixed? How do they fit together, and how do they fit together especially in contexts like the digital, where we're often much less having one-on-one conversations or arguments that are deeply interactive in a very full way, and instead are often much more for some other audience that we're performing for. So when you say an argument at its core is a way of trying to persuade people, and I think, fair enough. But also, what about the people you're trying to persuade who aren't part of the argument? Does it matter how they get persuaded? You mentioned advertisements a couple times, and advertisements, of course, are an example of trying to persuade people who are literally not in the position to respond, right? Both in the most invasive sense, where you're stuck in an airplane or something and you literally can't even run away from the ad, but also an ad that shows up on the TV, or an ad on the internet, or in a magazine you're reading, whatever. In each case, the goal is to shape somebody who's not actually interacting with you, if you're the person making the ads. And so effectivity there seems like it precludes from the very start active listening. And so I just kind of want to push you then a little bit more on this tension that's there throughout your statement of belief between things that are effective and things that are good in other ways. And I really want to encourage you to articulate more directly and clearly those other ways and why they matter to you. Not the ones that you think matter to me. Who gives a shit what I think? But what are the ones that matter to you, and why do they matter? And how do they how do they sit together with things that are more about effectivity? What's the relationship between the effectivity and ethicality as you understand these? I enjoyed reading this brief statement of belief, and I'm really looking forward to reading your major essay, the much longer, obviously, defining good argument in digital contexts. And I hope that these thoughts on the short piece will be useful as you're working on the final moments of that long piece. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.